Welcome to Forbes Movies. Joining me now is Scott Mendelson, a Forbes entertainment analyst and box office pundit. Scott, per usual, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Always happy to be here.
Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam is coming into theaters later this month. So for Forbes, you wrote, quote, the unofficial Black Adam box office preview. What are you predicting?
Well, it was basically if the film opens like most Dwayne Johnson star vehicles, it'll do about over under $35 million. That's incredibly low. Let me update that in a minute. Films like Rampage and Jungle Cruise and the second Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, um, and a couple that I'm probably forgetting offhand, they all open with around $35 million. If it opens as a slightly bigger, a big deal Dwayne Johnson vehicle like Hobbs and Shaw, Jumanji, The Next Level, then you're talking about $60 million. Now, I'm inclined to think that Dwayne Johnson in a DC Films flick will sweeten the pot. The question is how much of that is overlapping demographics. So where people that would be interested in a standalone Dwayne Johnson action fantasy vehicle are already the people that are going to show up for a DC superhero movie like that. Um, Off the cuff, I'm thinking 70, 75 if everything goes right. Maybe 80 if the reviews are fantastic, but that would be a lot better than most. Oh, it's San Andreas, the earthquake film that also opened $55 million in the summer of 2015. So if you have a gimmick for a Dwayne Johnson flick, you could flirt with 60, over under $60 million. Again, I think the DC shtick adds to the gimmick, so you might be looking at something closer to 70. Will it open bigger? Maybe. Will it open smaller? Quite possibly. It could be that people, that most of the interest is just concentrated online. I don't know. I'm inclined to think it's going to be fine. It looks snazzy, strong production values. The DC films have generally done pretty well, pre-COVID, despite the discourse arguing otherwise. That's a little complicated. Um, the one thing that I'm genuinely curious about, and I can't get a straight answer from the studio yet, because they the budget, and they tend to hold that to the last minute, and I don't blame them. But
Why do they hold the budget until the last minute?
because there's a lot of moving parts in terms of distributors and studios and production houses, and you basically have to get permission from everybody down the line. That's what I've been told, and that could be incorrect. Anyway, the only reason I care is that if it's a New Line film, and I think it is a New Line, it is a New Line film. If it's budgeted like a New Line film, so 90 to 120, it obviously has to make a lot less money in global box office than if it's a conventional Warner Brothers tentpole, which means it cost 150 to 200 million. If it costs closer to Shazam, great. It can do 400 million and be rolling in bucks. If it costs closer to the Batman with 180, that's a different conversation.
There's a few other big names in Black Adam: Noah Centineo, Pierce Brosnan, as well as Quintessa Swindell. Are these actors going to get additional people to the theater, do you think?
I think there'll be added value element in terms of as well as in terms of the characters they're playing. Aldous Hodge is playing Hawkman. Centineo is playing Atom Smasher. Pierce Brosnan is Dr. Fate. But I don't think those elements by themselves will be butts and seat straws. But the question is, does the introduction of the Justice Society make it more of a big deal than just, oh, it's a Black Adam movie starring The Rock? I think it will. I think it will help. Um, and it's the first big movie since Thor: Love and Thunder in early July. And as we've seen through the inexplicable legs for DC Super Pets, which has earned almost 4 times its opening weekend in North America, audiences are hungry for an old school 4 quadrant tentpole movie. And for some stupid reason, they've been deprived of that for the last 3.5 months.
And it's also been rumored that Henry Cavill may do a Superman cameo in the movie. Dwayne Johnson has hinted at that. Do you think that's possible?
No,
Why?
the people I know wouldn't tell me, and if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. I do know that the internet is very good at whipping up completely false bullshit rumors about Henry Cavill about to do XYZ. And then when he doesn't do XYZ, the internet acts like it's Warner Brothers' fault that the completely bullshit rumor didn't come true.
But Dwayne Johnson has hinted at it. So do you think that adds any weight here?
I know he said something like, by the end of this movie, Black Adam doesn't know who Superman is, or is Black Adam stronger than Superman? It was like, as far as I know, or something like that. But yeah, Dwayne Johnson is a good salesperson. He's very good at selling himself. Whether, even if, regardless of whether Superman is in the movie, if Dwayne Johnson would come out right now and say, no, he's not in the movie, that would dominate the discourse in a way that would take away the spotlight from Dwayne Johnson and Black Adam. Regular people wouldn't care. We know this because all three of Henry Cavill's starring Superman movies have been box office underperformers, but the internet would care, and that kind of SEO driven whatever would drive the discourse in a way that would overshadow everything else. If he confirmed that he was in the movie, then that would obviously give away a big surprise, yada, 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 and would also dominate the discourse. So his best course of action is to say, no comment.
Got it. And then let's say, far reaching here, Henry Cavill is in the movie. Would that give this movie more legs? Because it would, turn up conversation.
Unless he's like shows up for the entire third act and fights Black Adam or something like that. But I think if it's a cameo on the par with the button for Shazam, which was very cute, um, I don't think it will drive the numbers because, again, I mean, Superman, and this is my own theory, and I think it's backed up by the numbers. Superman is one of those properties that people know about more than they care to want to see in another giant super duper movie. Same way with King Arthur, Peter Pan, Tarzan, et cetera, which Sony's rolling the dice on Tarzan again. Good luck. That's not to say Superman's not popular, but he's generally less popular than, and this goes back 30 years or so, Batman, Spider-Man, Wolverine, et cetera, et cetera. And with the exception of Man of Steel, which had one of the a spectacular marketing campaign with terrific trailers that still hold up to this day, and was sort of implicitly sold as the next step after Chris Nolan's Dark Knight movies. It was produced by Chris Nolan. His name was all over it. So the film opened with $128 million over its counting previews, but then it sank like a stone. It dropped like 67% and didn't even cross 300 world domestic, and topped out at 668 worldwide. Halfway decent numbers had the film been better received, but it wasn't better received. The audience, I don't think they disliked it. They just weren't thrilled about it one way or another. I mean, I have very mixed feelings on Man of Steel. I think at its best, it's a visually spectacular and genuinely sincere reverse Exodus story where it takes the Superman myth, which is basically Moses, and sort of goes, okay, but what if Moses, what God showed up and Moses said, to hell with this, I'm going to defend the Egyptians against you. And that's an interesting idea. But I think clearly the movie wasn't a huge success, because if it was a huge success, Warner Brothers wouldn't have panicked and thrown Batman into the sequel.
I do want to move on to something else that you wrote for Forbes, and you wrote that it's time to stop trying to make Star Trek 4 happen. Can you explain that?
In July of 2016, the week of Star Trek Beyond's opening weekend, Paramount announced or leaked to the trades or whatever that they were going to make a Star Trek 4, and it was going to star not just Chris Pine but Chris Hemsworth, who had cameoed in the first Star Trek as Kirk's late father. I wrote at the time that it was a bluff to create the perception of success for Star Trek Beyond. Not to toot my own horn, but 6.5 years later, here we are. That is something that we've seen here and there, where studios will announce a sequel to a franchise-friendly film to create the impression of success, even if the film itself has either not yet opened or isn't doing all that hot. They did it with Jungle Cruise, they did it with Cruella, they did it with Wonder Woman 1984. In the second weekend of Green Lantern, it was crashing and burning. They announced a darker, grittier, Green. Did I say Green Lantern? They announced a darker, grittier Green Lantern sequel. 11 years later, there's no Green Lantern sequel.
Why did they do that then?
Because it creates the false impression of success and it makes the shareholders happy. Is, hey, look, we have a new franchise. Or in the case of Wonder Woman 84, they were selling the notion that putting that film on HBO Max and releasing it during one of the heights of the pandemic was not kneecapping one of Warner Brothers' biggest franchises. Spoiler, it kind of did. As far as Star Trek 4, I mean, they've tried 3 times to turn Star Trek into a Marvel level property or a Fast and Furious level property or even a Mission Impossible level property, and they have failed 3 times. The first Star Trek made 256 domestic, which is terrific, only made 385 worldwide on $150 million budget. 4 years later, which was at least a year too late, Star Trek Into Darkness earned only 228 million domestic and 467 worldwide. Yes, that was more than the first one, but that was mostly because of the 3D conversion that juiced up overseas ticket prices. 3 years after that, Star Trek Beyond only made 158 domestic and 338 worldwide on a $180 million budget. They have 2 choices. That they can either find a way to make a Star Trek film that only costs $90 million, so they can be happy with, 400, 250 to 350 worldwide, or they can stop making Star Trek films. Not to sound like Dwayne Johnson in The Rundown, great movie, by the way, there is no option C.
So, is there an audience for Star Trek 4, or you're saying no?
There is a limited audience for Star Trek 4. The problem with that franchise being a top of the line franchise is that the things that in 2009 Star Trek came out and it got great reviews, strong buzz. It was a young, hip, sexy cast. This wasn't your grandfather's Star Trek. um it's one of my favorite Onion video articles at the time was basically, you'll have to Google it because it's very funny. Star Trek fans decry new film as fun, entertaining, crowd pleasing. The idea that it was Star Trek for the cool kids, just like ironically Iron Man, a year later was basically a comic book superhero movie for cool kids who like Transformers and their parents. But that's a different conversation. But in 2009, it was providing the unapologetic blockbuster swashbuckling thrills that a lot of people wanted, but felt they did not get from the Star Trek or the Star Wars prequels and the last Indiana Jones movie. What's happened since then? Since then, Star Wars came back, and without getting to the discourse, I think you can argue that all 3 of those movies are swashbuckling action adventure films. Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker. Guardians of the Galaxy debuted and became basically the best Star Wars ripoff of all time, giving you top of the line ensemble blockbuster, space, swashbuckling outer space adventure. Fast and the Furious came out, or it went into super mode with Fast and Furious 6, Furious 7, Fate of the Furious, etc., etc. Those films offered inclusive surrogate family co-workers come together, work together to save the world adventure. So now everything that Star Trek offered that was unique under Star Trek in 2009 has been supplanted and replaced and usurped by something else. You don't need Star Trek anymore because you have Star Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Fast and Furious.
And I do, before I let you go, I want to talk about a trailer that was just dropped, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. The official trailer was just dropped. Let's discuss.
Oh yeah, it looks terrific. It's another visually dynamic, impressively, I don't want to say surreal, but the imagery, it doesn't look like Thor: Love and Thunder. It looks like a real movie, damn it. And this gives the spotlight to the villain or anti-hero, Namor. Namor? I'm not enough of a nerd to know how to pronounce that. I apologize. And that's going to be the villain / anti-hero. The film very much acknowledges the death of T'Challa / Chadwick Boseman. Unless it gets bad reviews and bad buzz, which I'm not expecting, the film can be a hit without earning as much as Black Panther did. The first Black Panther made 700 million domestic and 1.346 billion worldwide, including about 105 million in China, which is presumably going to be off the table this time. So, I'm not going to cry if it only does 475 domestic and, okay, here's a comparison for you. If it drops as much as Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom domestically and worldwide, with then China and Russia removed from the equation, it still does about $900 million.
So that's not bad.
No, that'll be okay. But again, if Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness could do 955, I'm not particularly worried about Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, a film that will be an event film, even to people that couldn't give two poops about the MCU. And that's a big deal because you have people that love Marvel, you have people that love superheroes, and you have people that love Black Panther. And there's a lot of people in that last demographic that aren't necessarily in the first two. I mean, between you and me, I mean, it would not surprise me if it were domestically the biggest grossing movie of the year. I still think Avatar: The Way of Water is going to rule worldwide, especially if it plays in China. But all of these three movies, along with Top Gun and Maverick, obviously, are going to be the top three biggest movies of the year without even putting up a fight. The only question is whether we're going to have three part two sequels in the same year that earn over 600 million domestic, which prior to this, there had been only one, Incredibles 2, not adjusted for inflation. So yeah, it looks terrific. Everyone is rooting for this film. The assumption that will be a generational event. And the only question, and to the effect, this is more my curiosity than anything, is does to the extent that the movie acknowledges and pays heed to the death of Chadwick Boseman make it a more emotionally draining experience in a way that might slightly mitigate repeat viewings? If it's a 2 hour and 41-minute funeral / wake for a beloved actor who was taken too soon, there are some people, and obviously no judgment, that will not want to sit through that more than once. I don't know, but that's something that I will be curious about when the time comes.
Well, that's one I am very excited to see.
Oh, and very quick, we talked a couple weeks ago about Will Smith not really being canceled after all. And just about an hour or two ago, we got the new trailer for Emancipation, which is Apple TV's new Oscar season contender that will open in theaters on December 2nd and will play on Apple Plus on December 9th, I believe.
And how was that trailer?
It looks terrific. It's Anton Fuqua's directing. It's a movie about a runaway slave who joins the Union Army. It looks very good. And I like Antoine Fuqua's action films, if for no other reason than, for the 2000s and 2010s, he was making hard action movies in a PG-13 world, but I digress. This, I would argue, is yet more evidence that despite all the online discourse of, oh, why did Will Smith get canceled when Roman Polanski is still making movies, or well, Ezra Miller still gets to make The Flash, or David O. Russell is still making movies, etc., etc., etc. Nothing's actually happened to Will Smith. He's been banned from the Academy for 10 years. Well, yeah, he slapped somebody on the last Oscar telecast. Regardless of my feelings on that, that's a reasonable punishment for that particular event. But otherwise, nothing's happened. He's still got his big Oscar movie coming out in early December. I think Apple kind of hopes that there won't be a big front runner by Thanksgiving, and it will sort of become the preemptive frontrunner if it's that good, just as was the case with Clint Eastwood's $1 Million Baby in 2004.
Could that movie Emancipation win Best Picture with Will Smith in it? Oh, he just can't win Best Actor.
Well, I mean, he can. He is eligible to win, but I'll put $100 on it just in the off chance it happens, then I'll be rich. But I mean, yes, he can still be nominated. He can still win. And obviously he can win every other, I imagine he will get a Golden Globe nomination just so that particular organization that likes to kiss up to celebrities can invite him to the show. And if he shows up, that makes the Golden Globes telecast a bigger event than it otherwise would have been.
But can he accept the award, or did he just get banned from the event, the Oscars?
Telecast, if by some fluke he actually wins. Or he just does this, PR-wise would be this, the quote-unquote smart thing is he just sends one of his co-stars up to accept on his behalf. So then he gives a lesser-known Black actor, a global spotlight on the Oscar stage. Because again, even if the Oscar campaign isn't terribly Will Smith-centric, they can still, promote everybody else involved in that movie and say, to riff on the Imitation Game Oscar punditry or the Oscar campaign from 2015, honor the movie, even if you don't want to honor the man. It opens on December 2nd, which means, the weekend after Thanksgiving, which is a famously dead weekend. And I have argued for years and years that Tom Cruise's The Last Samurai That opened at $23 million, did 113 domestic and 455 worldwide, opening right after Thanksgiving. If the movie is commercial, you can open there. There's no good reason for that to be a dead weekend. So I'm not expecting fortune and glory for Emancipation. I'm not expecting to be obviously as crowd pleasing as The Last Samurai, but there's money to be made if the movie's there.
Definitely keep our eye out. Scott Mendelson, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.